All right, so as you remember, we wrote an assertion that failed. And now we're going to make it kick ass. We're going to make it pass. So we're going to start with our student schema. Come back to the student.js file. And as you can see, there is article count property. However, like I said before, I don't want it to be saved in my database because we're going to use a virtual property. So let's just go ahead and delete it. Okay, now before we continue, I want to mention about a couple of bumps. Well, let's just call them challenges. Okay? You know that we use the article count property inside of the update test file before. Well, that's it. You should realize that we could not use this operator because there is no article count property anymore. Even so, I don't want to delete it, although it's no longer valid. I still want to see this code block right here. So what am I going to do? Well, if I can add here an X, I could solve the problem. But with Mocha running, it will skip this field. All right? I think that fixes the issue. Let's see. So we'll go back to the student schema and we'll define the virtual property. So I'm going to write here student schema.virtual and call it article count. Okay, so it's important where I define my virtual property, by the way. So look here, I'm not in the student schema. I define it out of the schema. Remember that. Don't forget it. You got it? Good. So by writing virtual, I tell Mongoose that there is a virtual property, a virtual field out here. But that's not all. We still need to access the virtual field. And to do that, I'm going to chain on a new statement here, which is get. So inside of it, we're going to write a function with the function keyword. Now, this is so very important. Let's figure out how we use or define this get thing. Virtual properties work with getters and setters of ES6. So when we define a getter, we refer to one of the properties in our model. Now, you might think that it's similar to JavaScript. However, get that out of your mind. When JavaScript encounters this JSON.ArticleCount, it's just going to find the property. Whereas the JavaScript in Mongoose not only gets the value of the property, but it also runs the function that we define and returns the function's computed value. So this result is produced by JSON.ArticleCount. Now, normally if we want to run a function, we should add a parenthesis in here. So just don't forget that we don't use parentheses here, right? Okay. First of all, we'll come back in here and see how this function works. Now, we've been talking about theoretically, so why don't we just go ahead and practice it? I want to add a console log here. So it'll say run the getter function. Close the terminal and open it up again. And we'll run the node command. It will start the node shell. And now we can work with the JavaScript functions. Okay, so to begin with, we'll say const students equals require source student, and then describe our new student, JSON equals new student. And then finally, JSON.ArticleCount. When I reference this, I expect that I will be able to run the function inside of the virtual field. Namely, the statement inside of the console log should be seen here. Okay? Press enter, and that's it. Now, as I said earlier, the getter thing not just brings us the value, but it also runs the function inside it. All right, so that's very cool. So now it's time to print out the number of articles that the student has, okay? So I want to right here return this and see what this word refers to here. So come on back to the command line, stop the shell, and run the node again. Define the student and Jason as a new student. And finally, JSON.ArticleCount. All right. So as you see, it brought us the same properties with JSON. Namely, this refers to instance of model that we're working on. So if I want to access the articles, I don't have to say JSON.articles. I can write in here this.articles.length. So I can access the number of articles this way, or, well, okay, let's save it and go back to the command line and run the test again. Stop the shell, run the node command, require the student, and define a new student, but this time not with the empty articles property, okay? So I'm adding on one title here. And finally, JSON.ArticleCount. You see how it gets back to us? 1, the length of the article's property. Okay, so let's have a look at it in our test file. So we'll kill the node and write npm run test. And what do you know? My test passed. Did yours? You'll also notice now I've got one pending test in here from updated test. Remember, we made it exit, so it is temporarily not working. All right, so that's pretty cool. That's how the getter works. We'll continue in the next session.